And I know in the book you talk about that, and one of the ways you frame it is around the three principles. Can you share the three principles?
Well, yeah, and essentially, in order to kind of explain that, I want to explain the notion of principles, because when I first came across this idea of three principles, I was very excited, because I thought of a principle like an axiom. So as above, so below. If you want a clean shirt, use this soap. I don't know, but something like a clever one-liner. And what I realize is that the principles that I talk about in this book aren't like that. They're not clever axioms. They're fundamental truths about life. They're the fundamental elements of how our experience of life works. So gravity would be an example of a principle in the physical world. There's no clever axiom for gravity. It would be like stuff falls. It's not that. But the principle of gravity explains why stuff falls, and that it will fall every time, and that there are no exceptions. And that's the thing about a principle. There's no exceptions. It's absolutely predictive. And to even think that there could be something like that in psychology was crazy to me. Because, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of diagnoses. So the idea that there could just be a couple of simple principles that underlie everything was radical. But I came to see that actually they were true, and we can go into these in more depth, but I call them the God principle, the awareness principle, and the creative principle. So the God principle is the principle of mind, and it's just a recognition that we aren't in charge. We aren't running the show. And I've had this conversation with atheists, I've had this conversation with fundamentalist Christians, I've had this conversation with Muslims, with people of pretty much every religion, and everyone gets that. Even physicists kind of say, well, yeah, of course we're not in charge of the show. And so the principle of mind doesn't say what is, it just says there's something going on beyond us. We're part of a larger unfolding. There's an energy and intelligence behind life. And we call that mind. And that comes in a way from the Buddhist idea of the big mind, out of which everything arises.
Why is it important that we see that?
Well, what's important about that, or I won't even say important, what's valuable about seeing that is that when you really get you're not in charge, you can stop trying to be in charge. Because it's really stressful to try and be in charge. It's stressful enough to be in charge if you actually were in charge. It's incredibly stressful to try to be in charge of something that you're not in charge of.
Yeah, but, and I love that, and yet I also am thinking from a listener's perspective, and even mine as I started to explore this idea of I create my life, that it's up to me. So how do you make sense of that and this idea that you're not in charge?
Well, one of them is wrong and one of them is correct. In other words, I'm
not wrong, right?
No, absolutely not. No, but I mean, it's great. But you see these people, and it's incredibly sincere. And I really thought, I'm supposed to be the one that's responsible for everything, and it just turns out not to be true. It doesn't matter how many times you affirm it. Your pen is still going to fall when you drop it. It doesn't matter. Gravity is just a principle. It doesn't care in that sense, and so if I can be maybe a little less flip, because I don't mean to be disrespectful or flip about it, but it seems to me that anyone who takes even a couple minutes to just sit back and look at their life will realize they didn't make the sun come up this morning. Right? They're not the ones spinning the earth. They're not. It just doesn't work that way. And when you see that for yourself, and I'm not saying because I say so, but when somebody has an insight into that, when they really see, I'm really not in charge, at least not in charge of most of it, they relax. You can see it. They look younger because there's a whole lot of effort we've been putting into something that no matter how much we effort, we're never going to be able to do. And so in a way, the principle of mind takes us off the hook for a lot of the things we've put ourselves on the hook for.
So the idea then that, well, let me ask it a little different. What's our role then?
Well, this is where the other principles start to come in. So maybe I can answer that by kind of leading on to the... So another principle is what I call the awareness principle, consciousness. And the idea of a universal consciousness is that as human beings, somehow we are aware of our experience. And our awareness will be unique to us. So there is a universal consciousness, which is just the capacity we have to experience. And then there's our personal consciousness. So I'm having one experience of this interview, you're having yours, people watching are having theirs. And that's because we all tap into this universal consciousness in our own unique way. Now, what the details of that uniqueness are the third principle, the creative principle of thought. So there's universal thought, which is this capacity that we have to create any possibility with our mind. But then there's our personal thinking, which is, well, this is what I think about. Oh, why did she ask me that question? That was a do. And oh, why is he answering the question that way? And oh, why are they talking like that? And that creates our personal experience of life. So when I talk about principles, I'm really talking at the universal level. I'm not talking about how you use mind, thought, and consciousness, or how I use mind, thought, and consciousness. I'm talking about the fact that underneath what either of us and anyone else watching and listening would do, there are these three fundamental principles at play. There is a universal intelligence and energy that we're all a part of. There is a universal consciousness and awareness that we're able to tap into to experience life. And there's a universal capacity for thought that creates the details of my reality and the details of your reality. And so to go back to your question, our job is simply to make use of those facts as best we can. And it's, in a way, what is so revolutionary about the book is that when you begin to understand what's really going on, you can make use of it better.